Man. Hello. The floof. The floof, Nat, Lily. This should be good. This should be one of those nights where I feel like I'm going to piss everybody off, and then I'm pleasantly surprised that I didn't. But there's time, so we'll see. Time will tell. Time will tell. Mystic, lovely to see you. Are you here to yell about the Calvinists? Because there will be room for that, in case you were wondering. There is plenty of room to yell at the Calvinists on an evening like tonight. Only one way to find out. That's right. Only one way to find out. It's the approach I take with most things. You know, just throw a bunch of knives into a dark room. Something will get stabbed. Like 2 minutes and we'll just get started. There's a lot to cover tonight. A lot to cover. You're here to yell in general. Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. Well, while we wait, anybody who's watching this later, there is, let me get my voice out of my ears or I will go insane. Anybody who's watching this later, we have a Discord. It's there for Discord related stuff. I'm a really bad salesperson, at least in this context. Discord is where everybody's at. There's like 150 people on there. It's pretty cool. We have a good time. There's real smart people on there. So if you ever want a resource, because you need to know stuff, great place to learn stuff, because there's great people there. There's a link in the chat to join the Discord. That's all I got. That's all I got. Do that though. It's good stuff. Moving on. This evening, we are discussing, what did we title this? Major Christian theologies broken down. What I mean by broken down is twofold, I suppose. We're going to explain them in depth. We're going to read the legitimate definitions for them, explanations of them. But then we're going to go off script and talk about how do the different theological views, perspectives, how do they align with different denominations? And then deeper, because most of you, this will apply to you, most people go to non-denominational churches. I'm here to tell you, you are attending a lie. The church might be great. I'm not saying it's a bad church at all, or that they're like intentionally lying to you. That's not what I'm saying. My point is that non-denominational is a lie. The church might not be a lie, but their theological claim of being non-denominational, it doesn't exist. It's a facade. It's an illusion. It's a delusion because it doesn't make any sense. And so we'll talk about that. So first things first, this evening, there are three major new kind of classifications for Christianity. Those are liberal, progressive, modern, and actually I guess four, because technically you also have conservative Christianity. So these are what I suppose you would call the four sects of Christianity. Again, being conservative, moderate, progressive, and liberal. I don't want to go super deep into any of them because you can search and you can, learn more about them yourself. But I'll read a little bit, just enough so that you have kind of the context. So conservative Christianity, also known as conservative theology, theological conservatism, traditional Christianity, or biblical orthodoxy. These are all synonymous. They all mean the same thing. It's a grouping of overlapping and denominationally diverse theological movements within Christianity that seek to retain the orthodox and long-lasting traditions and beliefs of Christianity. It is contrasted with the others, which would be liberal and progressive Christianity, which are seen as heretical in the eyes of theological conservatives. So I hate to say this, but look at it like politics. because in essence, it's similar, but it has very distinct differences. So I'm going to speak out both sides of my mouth. Think of it like politics, but understand it's nothing like politics. And what I mean is that conservative politics are people who want to hang on to tradition, the way it used to be, right? And I would count myself as one of them, both politically and religiously, but not fully. I think traditionalism has its place. I think especially when you're talking about religion versus politics, it's probably best to hang on to as much of the tradition as possible, in that it has something to do with the essential doctrines. Outside of that, up for debate. But conservative Christianity is basically just all theological views, all denominations that fall within a traditionalist viewpoint or perspective, where you want to keep a lot of that orthodoxy. It's one thing that the Catholic Church does somewhat well. They've held on to tradition. Now, there's a lot of things the Catholic Church has not done well, but that's not what we're talking about. They have held to tradition. Methodist Church. I hate the Methodist Church. And I use that word with intention, the word hate, because they are ushering in a lot of things into church that should not be in church, but also a conversation for a different day. But other than that, they're relatively traditional. They've held on to a lot of Christian tradition. Whereas if you go into many New Age modern churches, they've abandoned all tradition. It's all gone. So there's a middle ground in there, and that is what we call moderate Christianity. Moderate Christianity, you're not going to find a whole lot of information on, because it's kind of just made up. It's just a way of classifying certain groups of Christians who don't really fall into one or the other. But moderate evangelical Christianity has been around since roughly the 1940s in the US, and was a response to the fundamentalist movement in the 1910s. In the late 1940s, evangelical theologians founded a school. It's the Fuller Theological Seminary. It's in California. I believe it's still around, actually. And they basically set to teach Christian students from their perspective, which again is the problem of Christianity. The problem is we hold on to the fundamentals, the doctrines, and then we do whatever the hell we want. And now you've just created a denomination. That's what denominations are. I like this, I like this, I like this. It's like a buffet. I'm going to take all these things, but I don't like any of that stuff. So I'm going to leave all that stuff at the bar, and I'm just going to go back to my seat with this. Well, you just created a new denomination. That's how they all were created, in a very simple way of putting it. But moderate Christianity is basically a middle ground between progressive liberal Christianity and conservative Christianity. It's people who are like, okay, conservatives are a little bit too much tradition. Progressives are a little bit too crazy. We're going to land right here in the middle, and we're going to call ourselves moderate Christianity. It's nothing special. There's not a whole lot on it, because it's just made up. Progressive Christianity and liberal Christianity are technically two separate things. In the need to save time, if you care a lot, go read both. You can find plenty of information on both liberal and progressive Christianity, but basically they're the other side of the spectrum. So these are the groups of Christians. Again, this can be multiple denominations, multiple theological views. It's a classification of Christians, and it's an umbrella term. Whereas in a minute, we're going to go into specific theological beliefs. These terms do not have specific set theological beliefs. They are umbrella terms that could encompass several theological beliefs, which would in and of themselves then encompass many different denominations. But progressive and liberal are basically Christians who thought that conservatism is outdated, essentially. It's much deeper, but essentially. And they decided, okay, well, we're going to progress with the times. We're going to progress with modernity and with modern living, modern beliefs, modern society, modern ethics to some degree. And we're going to go this route, which is a much more progressive form of Christianity. These are one, just as a very blatant example of progressive or liberal Christianity, mostly progressive, would be allowing, and this might rub some people the wrong way, but I'm not saying I agree with anything, I'm saying information. Progressive Christianity would be allowing people who are gay to lead a church, not attend, because most, even conservative Christians, would allow people who are actively engaging in homosexual lifestyles to attend a church, but they draw the line at leadership. Progressive Christianity has no line. So they will allow anybody of any sexual proclivity, whether you're active or not, meaning you could be gay and married, and you could be a pastor of a church. Those are progressive Christian views. They're not conservative Christian views. These progressive views are also the views that are pumping out new Bible studies. They're pumping out new commentaries, new translations based on a modern perspective of the Bible. So they're taking what was Hebrew, right, translated to English, what was Greek translated to Latin, translated to English in the New Testament, and they're going back and they're saying, okay, now from 2023 perspective, society, issues, problems, what we deal with now, how are we going to interpret the Bible today? I hope everybody sees a problem with that. But that's what they do. So now we have new commentaries that are saying homosexuality was never even talked about in the Bible. Again, as a blatant example, there's many other things, many. I'm just trying to prove points to save time. Homosexuality is a big point, obviously. So they're saying, okay, it was never even mentioned. The word that you're talking about in the Greek actually doesn't mean that. It means this. And there are several arguments for what they believe that it means outside of the scope of this video. But that's progressive Christianity. It's from our perspective today, modern thinking, modern times, modern society. How do we make the Bible relevant today? Rather than saying, okay, how do we practice proper exegesis and put ourselves back then? They're saying, how do we make the Bible fit today? It's ass backwards. Ass backwards. It defies hermeneutics. It defies exegesis. It's saying those two tried and true theological concepts for learning are invalid. We don't practice exegesis. We don't practice hermeneutics. We will translate from our perspective today based on what we think about the Bible from back then. Not, okay, I'm going, like I tell you guys in Bible study, we're going to go to Corinth because we're reading Corinth. What time period was it? What were they thinking? What was their culture like? What was the demographic? What did they value? What was society like? And then going into that perspective and then reading the epistles to the Corinthian church. Rather, they say, okay, how do we interpret this right now in 2023? It's not going to make any damn sense, which it doesn't. So if you read any of these progressive Christian commentaries, they're ridiculous. They're wild because they're just made up based on modern times, which has nothing to do with what the authors were actually writing during that time period. I'll stop ranting. Okay, moving on to actual theological views. In my mind, and again to save time, there are three main theological views. And why? Am I handsome or is it an animal? Is there an animal? There's always animals in the house. I never know. My wife sometimes is like, oh, I love you. And I'm like, I love you too. And she's like, no, I was talking to the dog. Like, oh, okay. Got it. There's three main theologies. In my eyes, there are many more. We don't have time. Three major are Arminianism, Calvinism / Reformed theology, and open theology, which would make you an open theist if you believe that route. So Arminianism. This is a Protestant movement that arose as a liberal reaction to Calvinist doctrine and predestination. I'm going to read that again because you need to understand how they tie. Arminianism, which makes up a large portion of American Christians, whether they know it or not, it makes up a large portion. I'm sure some of you are Arminianists and you just don't know that. You probably are. So what Arminianism is, it was a Protestant movement of Christianity. So was Calvinism. But this was a Protestant movement that was a reaction to Calvinism. They did not agree with Calvinism. They did not agree with predestination. So this movement began in the early 17th century and asserted that God's sovereignty and human free will are compatible. Arminianists, easiest way to understand it, is you have Calvinists on one end of a spectrum. You have open theists on another end of that spectrum. Arminianists are kind of in the middle. They believe in free agency to some degree. They also, though, believe in God having a direct hand in things to some degree. So they're kind of the middle of the road between open theism and Calvinism. So the movement was named after Arminius, who was a Dutch Reformed theologian of the University of Leiden, who became involved in a highly publicized debate with his colleague, who was a rigid Calvinist. So these debates ensued. Arminius was like, don't agree. Just like every other denomination, what did he do? He goes and starts pushing his ideas, his opinions, and therefore created this entire movement, which was no different than what Calvin did with Reformed theology and Calvinism. He disagreed with the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church had let me give you a timeline. So we have way back when, you have the Way, the early Christian movement, and there is some debate about this timeline. It's accurate enough. The Way was Paul's day. It was the book of Acts. This was the Way. It was what they called the first movement of Christianity. Capital T, capital W, the Way. That's what it was called. They were not called Christians. They were called the Way. So you had the Way. Then, in my opinion, the next thing that happened is basically what we would refer to today as Orthodox Christianity. Very traditional, very closely tied to many Jewish roots. Very good stuff. From that, you have Catholicism. Catholics will argue with you to the death and say that they were first. Do not agree. Based on a million different things, I do not agree. But either way, let's give them a tie for argument's sake. So way back in the beginning, you have Catholics and you have Orthodox, regardless of which one was actually first. They were the originals, essentially. Catholicism over time changed dramatically. It was pretty good in the beginning. It was pretty solid, became corrupt. Orthodoxy, from my understanding, has stayed pretty tried and true. Not a lot of corruption, not a lot of weird cases that I can't mention on YouTube. Relatively without drama, just stuck to tradition and stayed very tied to their Jewish roots, which I like a lot. Catholics completely ditched Jewish roots, but held on to a lot of early Christian tradition. So Catholics and Orthodox, they're your origin story. Then you have Calvin, who opposed the Catholic Church. Then you had Arminianists, who opposed Calvin. And then a little bit later on, arguably, you have the instatement of open theism. There's a lot of debate about who actually started this movement. In my opinion, we have no idea. You'll find some names, you'll find some people. I don't necessarily agree because there's not a lot to back the idea. So to me, open theism just kind of happened because I'm not going to believe something just because somebody on the internet says that it's this dude or that dude. I would like to see more proof. I've never been able to find more proof. So that's your order though. Orthodoxy, Catholicism, Calvinism, Arminianism, open theism, with a bunch of other isms all around throughout that whole thing. But these are your primary ones. So Calvinism. And we did a deep dive on Calvinism on a Thursday months ago. So if you're interested in learning much deeper about Calvinism, then go back and watch that. It was one of these Thursday podcasts where we went real hard, real deep into the history, what happened, who was part of the movement, everything like that. So as a very brief overview, we're going to skip it. This is what happened. Again, he opposed the Catholic Church. He didn't agree with what they were doing. The Catholic Church was trying to control everything. They were making it impossible for people to read the Bible. They were making it hard for people to attend church in a spirited way. They were locking books away. They were chaining books to things. They were setting up a very governmental type of church where the church wanted all of the control. And it makes sense because they were heavily tied to political leaders at the time. Church and state were definitely not separate during that period. So Calvin was like, F this. And he basically started a movement under the nose of the Catholic Church and was a big part of how people were then able to read the Bible, get access to the Bible. There's a lot of really cool stories about the kind of underground railroad type stuff that they were doing in order to get scripture to people in an understandable way, in a way that they could grasp. So very cool, very good movement. In my opinion, he kind of went too far with it. So he took Christianity for what it was at the time, which was already ruined, if we're being honest. It was already totally trashed. But he kind of was like, I hate you guys so much, I'm going to run really, really far in the other direction. And so instead of solving it by maybe coming closer to the middle, he went way, way, way far to the other side. That's Calvinism. Their biggest thing you need to believe, or you need to understand, is predestination. It's the biggest differentiator between them and other Christian theologies. Predestination. Again, a lot of different views in between, but the general view of predestination is 1, Christians are selected prior to their existence to be saved. What are the implications of that theologically? It means it doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter if you have an epiphany. It doesn't matter if you feel like you encountered God. It doesn't matter if you do almost nothing wrong your entire life. Yes, nobody's perfect. So almost nothing wrong your entire life. If you were not elected, you are damned to hell. Meaning, God predestined every soul prior to their existence of either being saved and going to heaven or being damned and going to hell. Which just run that through all the way in your head. This means that God is evil. By some standard, God is evil. It also means that God predestines every evil act that has ever happened. Whether, and you'll get a lot of arguments depending on the Calvinist that you're talking to, but whether God indirectly allows evil to happen, or whether he actually commits the evil. Either way, he's implicated in evil. Then you can get into Job and the angelic council and how he allowed Satan to do this and that. That's a 5-hour conversation in of itself. So pull that away. It basically decides, and you have major theologians within the Calvinist movement who have been on interviews where they were asked, do you believe God predestines women to be abused in a very specific, gross manner? I hope you understand what I'm saying. The theologian said yes. To me, if God allows or predestines women to be abused, God is an asshole. Plain and simple. He's evil. To me. You might disagree. To me, there's no way around that. The only way, and any normal Calvinist you talk to, if you actually pick at them about this stuff, they immediately crumble because they have no idea what they actually believe. They just grew up in a Reformed church. They believe what they believe. They've never been picked at before. They've never been asked, okay, so every evil act is predestined by God. You watch them melt and crumble right in front of you because they have no idea how to answer that, because everything inside of them, ironically enough, their spirit, you might say, says hell no. Yet what they were taught says yes. And this gets into the more kind of complex stuff of like, okay, the evil alcoholic down the street who beats his wife never has anything bad happen to him. But the 8-year-old down the other side of the street gets cancer and dies before she's 9. If you believe in predestination, you believe God predestined both of those. I can't believe in that God. I can't. I'm not capable of that. For a million different reasons, both emotional and academic. I could never believe that. It means God is awful. He's terrible. By his own standards, he's awful. Free will versus destined to conduct evil acts are real different. Yeah, absolutely. It's like an extreme version of the curse conversation last week. Hard to believe God would make us hopeless to do better That's not God. Yeah, exactly. It's not God. Unless you believe that we are also evil and deserve it anyways. But then you'd have to answer for everything else the Bible says. So you could definitely take that route, believing that we're all so evil and we deserve it anyways. It's still somebody has to be at fault for the 8-year-old dying of cancer and the abusive alcoholic husband having nothing bad ever happen to him. You still have to make that make sense. You have to rationalize that theologically somehow. And if you decide, oh, we're all evil, well, then we should all have equal outcomes. And we don't. Evil people live wonderful lives. Amazing people live miserable lives. And everything in between. That would still mean God made us evil, not by our own choice. Yeah, exactly. Either way, somebody is implicated in the evil. Most of us, I would assume, believe that there are evil forces at work all the time that have nothing to do with God. They're completely separate from God. There is basically a dark side and a light side. And God is, the king of the light side, and Satan, as Christians talk about, is the king of the dark side. Most people believe that. But then that still runs you into problems. It then becomes a cop-out of every bad thing that happens. Oh, it's the devil, it's the devil, it's the devil. And every good thing that happens, oh, it's God, it's God, it's God. It's also not that simple. And this is why theology is very hard. No matter how far you go into these rabbit holes, all of them have problems in every possible way, which is why we have so many theological views. It's why we have so many denominations tied to those theological views, is because nobody is just willing to say, I don't know. This is what I think. This is what I believe based on this, this, and this. But I understand that contradicts my belief, and that contradicts my belief, and that kind of destroys a part of my belief. Nobody's doing that. Instead, they say, this is the truth. Do you also believe it's the truth? Oh, great. Let's go start Shabbatinanism, Christianity. And we'll indoctrinate 100,000 more people, and we'll be good to go. Get the tithes coming in. Nobody's just honest. In my experience, from the congregants at a small church to the highest level of academia, nobody's honest. Everybody lies or is deluded into believing that they have the truth. How stupid you have to be, in my opinion, and I love everybody that's watching, so I don't mean it towards anybody, but how stupid you have to be to grasp the scope of Christianity and then believe you're right. It's phenomenal to me. The more I learned, the further I got. Every step along the way, I realized I was dumb. I realized I know nothing about anything. And that has never stopped. Every time we do this, I realize I know nothing. Every time Ghost comes on and talks, I realize I know nothing. It never ends. Because there's no solution to any of this shit. It doesn't exist. And it never will. So it's to me, this is why I land where I land, which is our next one right here. Open theism. Open theism is complicated because, as I said, it doesn't really have an origin. You'll find different ideas of what the origin is or who brought it in. Or in my research over almost 10 years, we have no idea where it actually came from. To some degree, it kind of just popped up. And my belief is that it just is people who are like me who realize they know nothing. We know nothing. We never will. So what do we call ourselves? How do we look at the Bible? How do we look at church? How do we look at theology? And that's where open theism really comes in. Open theism is the theist, which means somebody who believes in a God, a divine being, without naming a specific one. Because God loves us and desires that we freely choose to reciprocate his love. Again, freely choose. Within Calvinist theology, Reformed theology, they don't believe you choose to love God. They believe God predestined you to love him. And he predestined your neighbor to hate him. Therefore, making this whole reality make no freaking sense at all. Everybody is a puppet. God is a big Machiavellian control freak, puppeteer, pulling everybody on strings. That's the Reformed theological view. Whether they admit it or not, that is the implication of what they believe, if you actually break it down. Open theism is the opposite. He has made knowledge of and plans for the future conditional upon our actions, meaning we are free agents to do whatever the hell we want. But God has knowledge, plans, and the future conditions already figured out, understanding that they are based off of our free agent actions, not controlling us. Just because we have free will doesn't mean God is not in control. It means he is not a puppeteer. It means he's not a Machiavellian control freak. It doesn't remove any of his omnipotence in any way. It's a different thing. Through omniscience, God does not know what we will freely do in the future, is what some believe. Though omnipotent, he has chosen to invite us to freely collaborate with him in governing and developing creation, thereby also allowing us the freedom to thwart his hopes for us. How many out of this group feel like at some point God allowed you to go do some shit you probably shouldn't have done? That if you believe God is who you believe he is, and he always wants the best for you, and he's always in control, why did he let you do that? To me, there's no actual answer other than because you have free will. Because you are not a puppet on a string where God is pulling those strings to make you dance. You wake up every day with the ability to go hurt somebody or go love somebody, to treat your children and your wife or your husband with love and respect, or to treat them like garbage, to go do something that lands you in prison, or to go work for a charity organization. You wake up every day with the free will because you are a free agent. And God allows you to live that way. And I always explain it like this. If Kat, my spouse, ever said, I don't want to be with you anymore, I don't love you anymore, would I chain her to the house and like not let her leave because I don't agree? Or would I let her leave? Because if somebody doesn't want to love me, I don't want them around me. Why would I want her to stay? What a miserable relationship for me to force her to be with me. That's predestination. Whether the individual wants God or not, they're predestined for it. You have no choice in the matter. That's not, it literally defies the definition of love. Love requires free will. Love cannot exist in a forced or predestined situation. It defies the whole purpose, the whole meaning of love. It doesn't exist in that model. So explain to me a loving God from a Calvinistic view. I don't believe you can. God desires that each of us freely enters into a loving and dynamic personal relationship with him, and he has therefore left it open to us to choose for or against his will. I've experienced that my whole life because most of my life I chose against it. And even when I became a Christian and then fell away from Christianity but stayed very much in tune with God, I still do things all the time that I know I should not do. I'm aware of it. I practice my free will against my better judgment at times. But it's proof of concept. Otherwise, God would not allow me to do those things. While open theism affirms that God knows all the truths that can be known, they claim that there simply are not yet truths about what will occur in the open, which is the undetermined future. So my favorite way of explaining this is think of it like a choose your own adventure book. And some of you have already heard this, so I apologize. But it's the best way ever to explain this. In the choose your own adventure book, there are multiple outcomes to the storyline. So if it's a book about a dog, as you get into chapter 1, at the end of chapter 1, it'll say, okay, if you want the dog to move to Hawaii and get a pet squirrel, go to chapter 8. And if you want the dog to become homeless and live on the streets in New York City, go to chapter 4. And then you choose which part of the story to go to. The author doesn't make you go, but does by you choosing mean the author doesn't know all of the outcomes of the story? Because that'll be what people tell you if you ever try to argue for open theism. They'll say, oh, well, then God doesn't know everything. If you have free will and you can do whatever you want, how could God predetermine, or how could God really know everything that could happen? Well, because he's God. What? Because of every other belief about God you believe in any theology. Because of that. Just because God allows you to choose doesn't mean God doesn't know every possible outcome of your free will. God knew every possible outcome. For me, I have a very checkered past. I've been a bunch of places I shouldn't have been. I've spent a lot of time away from people I love. I was not a great person for the vast majority of the beginning of my life. Now I'm the polar opposite. Now I'm very boring. I'm like an old man. I like to follow rules and I like to drive slow. God knew that whole time, okay, Joe's going to go be an asshole for a while. After I chose that, he also knew that had I not chosen to do stupid things, I could have had a very different childhood. I could have had very different teenage years. I could have not lost years of my life. So he knew, okay, Joe could go do this stupid stuff that he's thinking about doing, and these would be all the outcomes. He knows, okay, or Joe could go be good and nice and do the right things and go to college and blah, blah, blah. And then this would be his outcome. I still get to choose. And I chose the wrong one, but I still get to choose. It doesn't mean that God doesn't know what is going to happen. It means that God is not forcing one of them to happen. Just like God does not force an 8-year-old to die of cancer or force a POS alcoholic husband to stop beating his wife. Because this would remove the concept of free will. Foreknowledge versus predestination. Wildly different. They're totally different. Sam Harris told me this, not to. Sam Harris, dude. God, he really fell off a cliff during the COVID days, huh? I can't see God wanting us to love him because we have to. That's where faith comes in. Yeah, I mean, faith among other things, right? But if he forces us to love him, that's not love. It defies the meaning of the word. If you force your dog to do or to stay with you when the dog obviously hates you, the dog doesn't love you. The dog hates you. It stays because it doesn't have a choice. If you gave that dog a choice, the dog would run away, for sure. Our dogs won't leave our house because they know who takes care of them and they love us. It's very different. It's very different. People think Hitler went to hell because he actually went to heck because he got partial credit for killing Hitler. Jesus Christ. Oh, that was good. That was good. I had to approve that comment, by the way. YouTube was like, we're not going to let Hitler happen. And I was like, oh, yeah, we are. Oh, yes, we are. I love this analogy, too. It's such a butterfly effect, which is kind of scary, but also beautiful, that everything happened exactly as it did to make us all, hopefully remotely, less lives. Yeah, I think this is such a complex thing because there's so much confusion. There's so much confusion. People think denominations are one thing. They think theologies are different things. It's all tied together. And it's all based on randomness and opinions and nothing concrete. This is why I don't even necessarily tie myself to open theism, because even that has kind of a set structure of belief. I'm not comfortable with it. It's one of these things where, like, if you have to classify me, it's the closest thing, but it's not in any way perfect. There's a lot of stipulations still within open theism that I don't necessarily adhere to. There are many things within Calvinism I'm 100% on board with. Arminianism, 100% on board with. Catholic doctrines, 100% on board with. But then they have all this extra shit that has, one, nothing backed in scripture and is backed by people during early Christianity. Why the hell do any of us care about that? Why should we? Why is that any different than if me right here with the very small influence that I have, I'm like, okay, y'all, this is biblical truth because I said so. And you all trust me. So we're going to start this movement. I'm the new Joseph Smith. Let's go. It's no different than that. All these little things that different denominations and theological views, John Calvin, Arminianists, all these guys just took their opinions about Christianity, about theology, and then added their own stuff on top of it. So one, it's already their perception of something, which is it's not accurate. It's their perception. And then they add a bunch of other stuff on top of it, making it completely fabricated. All of these things are completely fabricated. Now, where does this tie into denominations? And then we're going to talk about non-denominational churches. There are many churches that will tell you that they're reformed, which means they're Calvinists. In my experience, again, there are more churches that will say they're non-denominational, but will teach Reformed theology. And that goes both ways. There are plenty of churches that will not claim they follow Arminianism, but they teach strictly Arminianism, Arminianist theology. It's easy to see. And then if you were to go to any given church's website, go to the About Us, Statement of Faith, sometimes said, what we believe, but usually Statement of Faith, and read it. Or Control F and type predestination. Many of them will pop up. That is not a non-denominational belief. That's a very, very denominational belief. That is a Reformed Calvinist belief. Yet it will be a non-denominational church. Why do they do that? There's a couple of reasons. One of them is funding. Because those of you who know, I went through the funding process to plant a church. I know exactly what the hell that thing is about. A lot of it is because of funding. They're not going to get proper funding or adequate funding if they are a Reformed theological church. They will as a non-denominational church. Why? If I am ARC, which is one of the biggest church planting organizations in the US, if I am ARC and I have this new church's account where I'm saying, okay, I'm working with the head pastor, I'm working with their head worship leader, with some of their volunteers. Okay, guys, we're going to plant this church. We're going to give you $250,000 per year for the first 5 years to plant this church. If you classify as a non-denominational church. If you classify as Reformed, we'll still help you, but you'll get $75,000 a year. Why? Tithes. A Reformed theological church has an extremely narrow customer base, congregant base. Because how many people out of all Christians are Reformed and know that they're Reformed? Because most Christians are ignorant. It's a small number. They exist, but it's a small number when you compare it to all of Christianity. So what are non-denominational churches? It's a scam. And I don't think most pastors understand it, but the church planting organizations absolutely do, because I grilled them about it. And just like when I was in seminary, I got ignored and I got pushed out of rooms. It's for tithes. So if you classify as non-denominational, what Christians would not want to come to your church? Really just Catholics or Methodists, maybe. Every other Christian is like, oh, it's a Christian church for all Christians. Yet half the time when you get there, they're teaching Reformed theology because that's what the pastor believes. Or they're teaching Arminianist theology. Or perhaps very, very, very super rarely, maybe they teach open theology. Either way, is that non-denominational? Or is it a lie to say we teach all theology when really they don't? They teach one theology. They just don't call the church whatever aligns with that theological view. And this was my problem when I was personally going through this process. I refused. I said, no, I will not do that. I will call it what it is. This is an open theological church. Where I stray from that is every Sunday, I will teach the Calvinist view, the Arminianist view, the open theist view, and perhaps sprinkle in some other denominations, like the Methodist or the Catholic view. Because my whole model is I'm not here to tell you what you believe. I'm here to give you a whole shit ton of information that is as accurate as I could understand. So doing my absolute best, you guys figure it out. That's always been my model. So we had to, obviously cut away from each other. Every church has a theological bend. Every single church. Unless you go to a church that does church like I just explained, where every topic, every passage, they give different theologies, interpretations of that passage. I've never seen that. So until that happens, non-denominational churches are lies, and everybody else is directly tied to a specific theological view. It's really that simple. We always have to approve Dumb Cat's. That's true. Well, he's got good stuff. I mean, I'm just going to prove it every time. YouTube already absolutely hates me. What do I have to lose? Can you go over some stuff about open theism you don't agree with? Yeah, we can definitely do that. The Added Ghost question, is there anything you do think Calvinism has uniquely correct? No. I think the only things that I dramatically disagree with are things that they made up. And then I guess kind of took to the goalpost. So predestination, just to be totally clear, it's in the Bible. The elect is in the Bible. I mean, read Romans. These aren't just totally fabricated concepts. They're in the Bible. It's an argument of interpretation. What did Paul mean? What was he trying to get across? And from my perspective, what I would tell you guys is aggregate the information. If you're going to take what Paul talked about in one letter, one book, and put more weight in that one book than similar concepts spread through all of his writing, to me, that's exegetically irresponsible. It's manipulative almost. Because if you take these concepts of predestination and this concept of the elect, where some people are special, and you look at the rest of the data in the Bible, there's no support. There's no substantial support. There's a hell of a lot of support for the idea that anybody can come to know Christ. There's a hell of a lot of support that everybody has a totally equal ability to change their life and learn of salvation, to correct, to repent, to come to God. There's so much more data pointing in that direction than there is pointing to predestination or the elect. Some people are destined to hell. You have to ignore the majority of the Bible to validate that belief. It still doesn't mean it's wrong. They could be right. I have no idea. But based on what we have that is testable, that is calculated, that you're able to calculate, I'm going to go on the side of the majority, not on the very small parts of the Bible that seem to teach a certain concept, but then gets wiped out by multiple authors over multiple books. I'm going to aggregate and go with whatever the weight is actually on. I know I'm not predestined because the Black Hebrew Israelites outside Starbucks told me I'm not. Dude. Jesus. All right. So yeah, we can go to more of kind of some of the open theism stuff. And then at some point, if you guys want, we can go deep into open theism. Let me just try to find like some of the keys here. Philosophical considerations. All right, yeah, let's do this. So there are two primary ways of understanding the nature of human freedom. The compatibilism or compatibilist view of freedom is that so long as one is acting in a manner that accords with one's desires, or can be otherwise identified with one's character, one acts freely. Our freedom is compatible with our actions being determined, so long as we are acting in the way we want. We are free so long as we are to desire otherwise. We could act otherwise, and this is so even if we could not desire otherwise. If this is the right view of our freedom, then God might predetermine all of our actions while they are yet free, so long as they are consistent with our character. It's confusing. Some of it gets confusing. And once it gets really, really philosophical, it tends to move a little bit away from religion. And this is just like, this is something that I'm vouching for. I'm also going to be honest and say, like I said earlier, there are some issues with it, in my opinion. And these are some of them. So some of the open theist community guidelines, they take you away from Christ. They take you much deeper into the philosophical and much further away from the theological. Meaning that they tend to stray the focus from how do we understand God and the interaction with humanity, and instead they make it, what is the mystical side of humanity? And there's a distinction. If we're talking theology, the focus should be God and how he interacts with humanity. Some of the things I do not agree with within open theism, the philosophical end of it is probably the biggest one. And that manifests in a bunch of different ways, which is, it takes up easily the lion's share of my issues with it. Because once you hit that philosophical side, you're talking about a whole bunch of other stuff at that point. And this is where they lose me. Open theism in my mind is just as simple as I've said. You are a free agent. God understands every possible outcome. God does not intercede in your free will. He does not interject or try to sway you. And this is where it gets complicated. What then do we say about prayer? Should you pray? Does praying have any effect whatsoever on outcomes? One example of thousands that make theology impossible. And take it from either route. If you believe in predestination, what good is prayer? If you believe God predestined every single thing that happens, down to a butterfly choosing to go to this flower instead of that one, why the hell would you pray? Seriously. If everything is predetermined, everything is predestined, prayer is what? What is the purpose of prayer? Does it actually do anything? It can't. It can't. And this is when, if you debate with a Calvinist, this is another point where they will just crumble right in front of you. Because it's something most of them never even thought about. If everything is predetermined, prayer does not matter. Prayer is completely irrelevant. It is you wasting your breath. The only prayer that would make sense is worship, where you are just paying homage to God for being God. But if you're praying for your cousin, or you're praying for your kids, or you're doing anything beyond just some kind of worship, you're doing nothing from a Calvinist point of view. From an Arminianist point of view, which is many non-denominational churches, the majority of them, they practice Arminianist theology. They're in the middle. So they believe to some degree God injects himself into the world. God has a part in things that happen. He's pulling some strings somewhere, somehow. Which means they have a bit of more of a justification for what prayer actually does. They, at least without saying it or with saying it, believe to some degree prayer does something. Just not sure why. Just not sure how. But we're going to pray because we believe that God is active in the world to some degree. I pay good money to watch Joe debate. I've tried. You know how many people have reached out to me over the years and asked me to come on, and I've agreed, and then they don't do it? And how many people I've reached out to? Because I did a video a while back about why I'm not years ago. I did a video years ago where I explained why I'm not a Calvinist. If you go to YouTube, you type in why I'm not a Calvinist, tattooed theist, you'll see it. I'm like 22 years old, and I'm just explaining why I think it's BS. I need to watch it again. Maybe I should redo it. But regardless, a bunch of people obviously were upset about it. And I tried to set up like not even a debate, because I don't like the debate. I want to have a conversation with somebody. I just want to have a coherent, rational conversation about why you believe what you believe. I don't like the gotcha thing. I'm not trying to make anybody look stupid. I just genuinely am interested in why people believe the things they believe, especially when, to me, they don't make any damn sense. I don't care if they still walk away Calvin. I don't care. I don't care what anybody believes. I'm down if all of you are Calvinist. I don't care. I would just be really interested to know how you justify that, how you rationalize that. But I used to bring the Jehovah's Witnesses into my house, make them coffee that they would reject until I made decaf, and then I would just sit there and talk to them. And I would pick them apart in a very respectful way, but just try to make them see that none of what they were being told was consistent. It's all inconsistent. And so is Christianity. It's no better at all than Jehovah's Witnesses. It's worse, in fact. Christianity is the most divided religion on this planet. It is not the best religion. It is the worst. And that says nothing about the doctrines or the beliefs or about God. It says something about the people. The people who built Christianity were garbage, and then continued to be garbage, and continued to be corrupt, and continued to care about control more than about God, and status more than about teaching people things. You should make regular coffee and tell them it's decaf. No, I want them to keep coming. I want them to keep coming. Does it apply to all other religions? Does what apply to all other religions? I don't know what that's in reference to. But so going back. Open theology allows you the intellectual freedom to not be tied down to a specific view of anything, really. There are fundamental things if you're going to call yourself a Christian. You believe in Yahweh, you believe in the God of the Old Testament. You believe in Jesus Christ. You believe in his divinity. You know, that, and there's even argument here, but that he is one and the same with God in some way that it shouldn't make sense to us. If it does, it's not that great. If it does, it's a part of this realm, not that realm. But in some capacity, they are synonymous. And same thing with the Holy Spirit. Those are fundamental Christian beliefs. If you don't believe in those things, at least to some degree, you're just not a Christian. You could still technically be an open theist, because theist has nothing to do with Yahweh. It has to do with divinity, which is not a Christian word. It's an all religion word. It's really a reality word. Divinity is something above our reality. It's something outside of our reality. Yeah, with other characteristics too, but simply put. So an open theist within a Christian view simply believes in the fundamentals of Christianity, in my understanding. And this is what I've built for myself. This is not probably the definition you'd get if you search it. So go look later. But to me, with spending most of my life, wasting most of my life doing this, open theism is, I am a free agent. God created me. I believe Jesus Christ is divine. What exactly that means, don't know. The Holy Spirit, I believe, exists. I think it's kind of a goofy word that we've attributed to what is intuition, which I believe is something that has to do with spiritual energy that ties us to the Creator, which is God. So I hit all that matters within Christianity with nuance. I hit it all. I believe the Bible is predominantly accurate, not inerrant, not at all, because it's not, and that's fact. Moving on. But as an open theist, I believe I'm a free agent. That God, who is tied to Christ, who is tied to the Holy Spirit, who is tied to the Bible with accuracy, I believe that he created us to be free. I believe he created us to be free because there will be something in another realm past this life, past our reality, that something here will have to do with. no idea what. Christians in general will tell you exactly what. This is my purpose, and this is the plan, and then the afterlife is going to be like this. Based on what, dude? Where the hell are you getting any of that from? Some dude who wrote that? So if I write that today, should people 1,000 years later believe that? If you're good with that, that's fine. I'm not good with that. I would rather be honest about what is apparent and be open about what is not. I know that I'm a free agent. It's a testable theory. I have lived that free agency for both better and for worse, without a freaking doubt. If you don't know my history, go watch the video. I am a free agent. That's a fact. Outside of free agency, I believe the fundamentals of Christianity. Prayer. Like we were talking about with Calvinists, prayer makes no sense. With Arminianists, it makes enough sense. With open theists, prayer makes a lot of sense. Still, what weight prayer actually has with outcomes, no idea. No idea. Nobody does. Nobody ever will. And anybody who definitively says that they do is a liar, a con man, or an idiot. It's one of the three. But I believe prayer does something. Many people, when they have prayed at some point in their life, it's usually not every time. It's usually not even often. But at some point in your life, when you've prayed, you've truly felt God present in some manner. Whether you call it the Holy Spirit or you saw the face of Jesus or whatever, man. You truly felt some physical, energetic thing that to you was God. Open theism allows the open perspective of prayer does something, but we don't know what. Prayer will never allow God to directly do or undo anything, because that removes free agency. If I pray to God about the 8-year-old down the street who's dying of cancer, and God lifts the cancer, God is now a puppeteer, and she is a puppet. God is a control freak. Because as someone said, I think Nat said, there's a butterfly effect. God saving the 8-year-old might affect somebody down the line, which affects somebody else down the line, which affects society at large in some way, and affects this person's business, and then that affects all the employees, and that affects their children. Everything is tied together in some manner. You can't just have a divine being do something in our reality, the way that it's structured, and expect nothing to happen. It's going to cause a cascading effect. So personally, from an open theist view, and I'm not pushing this on anybody at all, believe what you believe. I don't believe a prayer will ever have God directly do something, because it still makes God evil. If I pray because my daughter's sick and dying, and God saves her, but the 8-year-old down the street dies of cancer, and everybody prayed about her too, God is an asshole. Does that make sense? You can do whatever gymnastics you want to do to justify your beliefs against reality. I will not do that. Reality is reality. You can be deluded if you choose to be. That's fine. I can't do that. So if it's proven that prayer does not work in certain situations, and then whether it's by chance or God actually does answer the prayer in another set of situations, it makes God evil by his own standard. I can't stomach that, nor does it logically make sense. Why save my kid and not hers? And the answer you get from the pastors is what? Oh, God works in mysterious ways, you know? God had a plan for her. God needs another angel in heaven. Shut the fuck up. No. What bullshit. This is the massive differentiation between a pastor who's not educated in theology, and somebody even not a pastor who's educated at least rudimentarily, I don't know, who has a rudimentary understanding of theology. That person who has a rudimentary understanding of theology is going to be honest with the person. I have no idea why why your daughter died. I have no idea. Just know that we love you. We're here for you. Anything you guys need, call us anytime, day or night. Anything we can bring you guys, we'd love to set the service for. That's what an honest pastor would do. The piece of shit pastor says God works in mysterious ways. That God has a plan for your daughter in the afterlife, or God needs another freaking angel in heaven. Get the hell out of here. It's disturbing. It's disturbing. Open theism, to me, is the best way to understand the theological with reality, where God doesn't directly interfere with our lives, but that God has influence on our lives. Meaning, when I pray for guidance in some way, say I know Ghost is going through something very specific, and I pray on what Ghost is going through and how I can be of service to him during that time, I might be influenced by God. Does God force me to do anything? No. But he will influence you, meaning he will what we call your intuition or your conscience, perhaps. God will influence you somehow and pop something in your head, and you're like, oh, that's the solution. And then I go to Ghost, and he's like, holy shit, dude, thanks. Problem solved. God didn't force me to do anything. And I could have got that intuition. I could have got that message from God and be like, I'm not going to do it. Which I've done. And then guess what? Somebody suffers like Ghost. And then guess what? That starts a chain reaction. Then one of Ghost's family members has to deal with him because he wasn't able to solve the problem. And then it cascades to that family member's kids, and then goes on. It all adds up. It all cascades off of one thing. But if I take the message from God and I process it and I'm like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. It seems like it would address whatever his personal problem is. And then I go to Ghost and, give that to him. And then we solve the problem. It stops right there. Alignment with reality, open theism makes the most sense. It still doesn't mean it's right. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it makes the most sense. Just because something makes sense doesn't make it right. I want to be super clear about that. I gave up being good when I found out I could go to C's Candles and buy divinity. What is C's Candles? Oh, candies. And then that's why the chocolate bar. I got it. I'm with you guys. Where would you say Catholicism falls into all of this? I know they're all branches technically in opposition, but does it meet one more than the other? Catholics would probably be the closest to like Christian conservatism with like an Arminianist somewhat approach to it. So you got to think like Catholics were super strict to one side. Calvin came super far on the other side. Arminianists were kind of in the middle, meaning that Arminianists took some of Calvinism, some of Protestantism, and then they kept some of Catholicism. So if you had to pick one, I get Arminianism, for the most part, would probably be the closest to Catholic views. But to tie them together, I'd say avoid it. It's not the greatest comparison, but it would be the closest. I think our prayers. One of my biggest gripes with Catholicism is the Eucharist being literal and not symbolic. Yeah, I have the same problem with that. I think our prayers, actually, I think Father Mike Schmidt, if anybody knows him on YouTube, I did a few videos, mostly old, but a few recent ones this year in response to some of his stuff. And I think one of them was on the Eucharist, where I go through the verses, word for word, and kind of break down why it's symbolic and why it's not literal. If anyone's interested. Ghost, I kind of like the Eucharist mystery. I'm sure if I took more time to think or learn about it, I may have different ideas, but it's cool to see a miracle happen every week if you believe it. I guess what I would say is why? I have no idea if what they're, well, I guess a few things with that, just to push Nat. And I have plenty of people I love very much who believe the Eucharist is a literal thing. I could care less. A few things I would push at you is, one, why is the priest special? So why can only a priest do it? Because what are the implications with that? The implications are people who are either educated or who are special or elected by God to be special are the only people who are qualified to turn bread and wine into Jesus' actual body and blood. So by one of the things that you're saying when you go with the literal Eucharist, you're saying it without saying it, is that you believe God does elect certain people to be special and above other people. It's something you have to grapple with then, is that whole concept. Otherwise, I could do it. And by Catholic standards, I sure as hell could not. So you'd have to kind of grapple with that yourself. If that cracker is the literal body of Jesus, when we put out is also Jesus, God, that would make Jesus Lord of the sewers. I just don't see it. I'm seeing the Eucharist in person. I respect the beliefs, but it's illogical to me. I do love Father Mike. His Bible and your podcast got me interested in truly studying the Bible. Yeah, I haven't listened to it, but I've seen it. I've looked at it. I don't know Bishop Barron. I'd have to look at that. Yeah, I'd have to look at that. The other thing, Nat, I guess I would say, because there are some Catholics in the group, I would say is, why does it need to be his literal body and blood in the first place? Like, what's the actual purpose? And I say that rhetorically because I grew up in Catholic church. I'm sorry, I grew up in Catholic school. I went to Catholic school for 8 years. 9, technically. So I know all the answers. I just don't find any of them satisfactory. Why does it need to be his literal blood? Why do we need to eat his literal body? For what purpose? Actually, not like the cookie cutter Catholic answer, but like from a human being that you are, somebody who's also very smart, why does that need to be a thing? What is the actual practical purpose of it? I think it's similar to the apostle conducting miracles on behalf of Jesus. Plus, they do put a lot of devotion into the priesthood, not arguing for or against, just interesting point of view. Sure, but back then also anybody could be an apostle, technically. Paul would just appoint apostles, right? So the New Testament kind of shows that you don't need to be special. You also don't need formal education. You don't need any sort of formal training. They just became apostles. Not in the very, very beginning. They were appointed. But after that, it was just kind of whoever was putting in the work was then given that title. To anybody who is, learning under one of the apostles, the originals, they would become. And then it just kind of gets passed. But there's nothing special about any of them. There's nothing appointed about them. There's also no indication anywhere else in the New Testament that the Eucharist was literal. And again, I don't care. I don't think much about the Eucharist at all, whether it's literal or not. To me, it's an inconsequential part of Christianity. And I get a lot of pushback for that. So I understand if you're upset by me saying that. But eating a cracker, whether it's symbolic or literal, if that is what differentiates me from going to hell or going to heaven, God isn't who I thought he was. He's kind of petty. Kind of petty. So I'm all set. I don't get it either way. So just like you, Nat, I'm not pushing against Catholics because I think the non-denominationals who decide to do it once a month for some reason are just as silly. I think either way, it's totally silly, is my opinion. When I go to Catholic church, I 100% respect it. I participate in it. And when I go to non-denominational, I participate on the very rare weird events for no reason that they decide to practice the Eucharist against every other week. I have no clue, but I participate then too, out of respect. I don't think it has to be. The breaking of bread is beautifully symbolic with that. Yeah, and that's kind of the point. Is it's the concept of the breaking of the bread in remembrance of who Christ was and what he did. And I think whether you do that with a literal perspective, awesome. And I think if you do it from a symbolic point of view, awesome. Because I think either way, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So whatever you're comfortable with, or whatever, speaks to you, if you want to say that, whatever makes you feel better, I think is a perfectly valid reason to do it, whichever way you choose to do it. I don't think there's a right answer, is what I'm saying. I've said it before, but I think the placebo effect is divine. So that's the only mechanism for the Eucharist being literal. That's an interesting kind of way of looking at that. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I've never looked at it like that. The placebo effect is divine. So that's the only mechanism for the Eucharist being literal. Yeah. It's just one of those things, man. It's like baptism. I don't get it. I mean, I totally understand it, obviously. I don't get it in a practical sense. Baptism, you'll have Christians, and this is another good example for what we're talking about. You have Christians who literally don't believe you're saved if you didn't get baptized. And they will go so far as to say, if my 7-year-old daughter, who she says she's a Christian, I don't indoctrinate her, but I talk to her about God. And she has chosen to continue asking me and continue going through things with me. I don't push it on her. It's her choice. She chooses it. So she, you could call my kid a Christian for as much as you could call a 7-year-old anything. But people will say, those Christians will say, if she died tomorrow and wasn't baptized, she's going to hell. Why? Why do they say that? Because they chose a theological belief, they chose a denomination, and they will die by it, even if it makes no damn sense. Even if other parts of the Bible completely disprove it. Because religion is like politics. People have no freaking clue what they actually believe. They chose a team, and they will die for the team. It's illogical. It's also not backed by scripture in any sense at all. This is Christianity. I wasn't even afraid that my baby would go to hell if she didn't get baptized on time and something bad happened. What? Oh, I read that wrong. I wasn't ever afraid that my baby would go to hell if she didn't get baptized on time and something bad happened. Because you shouldn't be. It goes back to us picking and choosing what we agree with and what we don't, which admittedly is problematic. It is the crux of the issue of the religion. It is the reason I've left the title of the religion. I don't want to be associated with it because people are turned off by it. Do you know how many more people I've been able to reach with the Christian message by just not using the word Christian? Explaining everything the same. Talking about Jesus, talking about God, talking about the Bible. Nothing's hidden. I'm not, conning people. I just tell them Christianity's bullshit. It's a lie. It's the most divided organization that has ever existed in the history of humanity. It has some of the most arrogant, self-righteous, illogical, brainwashed sheep that walk this planet. And at the same time, I really believe they have more of the truth than anybody else. They've just completely bastardized it. They've completely destroyed it. Christians suck. Christianity, prior to being destroyed, is, I think, the closest thing we have to understanding the divine, the other realms, the afterlife, and our reality more than anything else. I think understanding baptism is far more important than doing it, but I'm just some guy. I think the concept is important. The concept of an outward reflection of an inward change. I get it. It's cute. It's pretty. It's public. I like it. I don't think it has anything to do with salvation. It's got no salvific nature to it whatsoever. Is my opinion. In my opinion, baptism is the only time many people will stand alone with all eyes on them and publicly acknowledge Jesus as Lord. Exactly, which I think is a benefit. I think it's a good thing. I think it's totally a positive thing. Is the public declaration. It's a public acknowledgement of what you believe. Chill Christians like you, B. Haney, and others actually did set me more on fire for God as I began learning and questioning. Yeah, I mean, that was my story, man. I began to lose faith. The longer I was a pastor, like a vocational pastor, the longer I stayed in seminary, I just cared less and less. I started to believe God was just either an asshole or didn't exist. Because I'm like, there's no way this shit show of a religion could be right. So I fell away for a while. And then I slowly came back through other religions. I started studying everything for years. And eventually I got to a point where I'm like, shit, Christianity's probably right. They probably have most of the truth. I think the Hindus, the Buddhists, I think they have a lot of truth. They use different terms. They have different ways of expressing things. But so many concepts of those faith systems function in line with Christianity from a different demographic perspective. Still truth. Like it or not, still truth. But Christianity as a whole seems to have captured the majority of the accurate information, or most reliable information at least. Still not without its problems, but the majority, which again, just like I tell you guys, it's aggregate the information. If you were to aggregate all the data from all the religions against what is reliably testable or historically accurate, Christianity has the most, with still a large percentage being inaccurate, not inerrant, so having mistakes, and kind of messed up. A lot of Christians were real messed up in the beginning, just like they are now. The problem is the more we stay in these mega churches, the more we stay even in the smaller churches, but that are run by church planting organizations that are funded with and fund the mega churches, the more Christians are going to stay ignorant to reality, just to general reality. The more they're going to stay ignorant to what theology actually is. I guarantee, if I go into any large church and I perform a poll, I could stump easily 85% of the entire congregation within 3 theological questions. They would crumble. Because Christians aren't Christians. Christians are people who want to label, who want to be a part of, who want a community, who are overly emotional in many cases, who are illogical, who are easily brainwashed, who don't use their brain, and who are sheep. They're not cognitively thinking people. And the minute you force them to do it, they unravel. And I don't think they're inherently that way. I think they've been indoctrinated into being that way. And I don't think it's totally the church's fault. I think a lot of it lies on society. I think a lot of it lies on the government. I think a lot of it lies on public schools. But I think the church just jumped right in there with everybody else and started indoctrinating people. Think this way, think this way, think this way, think this way. Yeah, how about don't? Don't. Think the opposite of that shit. It's all the parents. Parents are definitely at fault too, which is why you'll never catch me jamming my beliefs down my kid's throat. We talk about all different kinds of beliefs. If she doesn't want to go through the Bible, we don't do it. When she does, we do. I don't force her to do any of it. And I never will. I just struggle with the Catholic guilt that if I don't go to church, there's a level of laziness or lack of devotion. What is church? Let's function off of that. What is church? Is it a building? I'll help. The answer is no. Therefore, you could do church anywhere. So how do they know if you're doing church? This is church. We're sitting, we're talking about God. This is ecclesia by definition. The definition of ecclesia, which is the Greek word for church, is people gathered together for a specific purpose. That's what this is. We're gathered together today to talk about some of the history and some of the modern Christian movement, what is broken with it, and how to potentially start to fix it. This is, by definition, church. I get what you're saying, but I don't agree with it is a cult. Yeah, but cults have church. I mean, Joseph Smith is absolutely a cult. So we are cults, but we do church. If church wasn't so formulaic, maybe we would go more. Yeah. I mean, I agree. That's one of the reasons that I don't go. That essentially Freemasonry, when in doubt, helping widows and orphans is perfect religion. I mean, man, it's just humanity. Helping widows and orphans should just be humanity. The real church is loving and helping people. Yeah. I mean, the real church is people gathered together for a purpose. Whether that purpose is to become better educated or to go on a mission to help a demographic or, you know, whatever. It's people who believe similar things gathering together to do a similar thing for a good cause, for a good purpose. That's what ecclesia is. Ecclesia was actually used during, like, within a war context back then. Soldiers were gathered together for a specific purpose. It's where the word ecclesia comes from. So really, church should be a group of people who believe similarly, who are trying to F stuff up in a positive way, Are trying to, I mean, what was Christianity in the beginning? What was the purpose of Jesus? He was a rebel. He was a total rebel. He was an anti-establishment person. He was trying to destroy organized religion. There's no way around that. That's a fact. His entire mission was to bring people to the Father and destroy the system, quote unquote, the machine. He was an anti-establishment rebel. That's what he was. He was counterculture as they come. You could not get more counterculture than Jesus Christ. And what do Christians do? They adopt culture. They adopt government, which is now who sets culture. Christians have lost their way. At the highest levels of leadership, they've lost their way. They're not gathering together for that purpose anymore. They're gathering together for emotional fulfillment, not spiritual fulfillment, not academic fulfillment, not theological fulfillment. It's emotional fulfillment. They want to feel something. I want to feel something. That's why people go to church now. Or to, like you said, avoid guilt. People go to church to avoid feeling guilty. Church isn't supposed to make you feel anxious at all. That's why I left and never went back, because they force you to believe that you need them to be good. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we talked about that maybe last week. It's the guilt factor should be an immediate red flag, and you should run away. Yes. And if you can find a church that doesn't do it, awesome. Awesome. Otherwise, find a church like what we do. Gather together with other people who believe similar things and who want to do something productive. This isn't it. There's a million other things similar to what we're doing, I'm sure. In some fashion, it has to exist. So find those. If you can't find a community church, if you can find a community church, I absolutely think you should go. If it's good, you should go. Because community is important. And you, being the thinker that you are, because you're sitting here listening to me, you could have influence on that church, which would be really positive. It'd be very good. I made Joeist. The church from Joe is pretty cool. Jesus Christ. Our Joe. Our Joe who art in heaven, hallowed be that. You guys are like, you're implicating me in your blasphemy. You're doing blasphemy like through me. God is going to smite me because of you. Church is a drug for some people. The feeling of superiority it gives to that particular personality type. Yeah, no, absolutely. That is true. Absolutely. People absolutely get a hit off of going to church. It's a superiority thing. It's a checking the boxes thing. It's a social status thing. It's the never mind. It's all those things. It's all those things, without a doubt. My church is so eeny weeny tiny. I kind of feel bad when I don't show up. But you shouldn't ever feel bad unless you did it with bad intentions. Then yes, you should feel bad. If you were like ready to go, nothing really stopping you, and then just decided not to go so you could sit and watch TV or something, then yeah, you should feel bad. But if you don't go to church for like a valid reason, spend 10 minutes dedicated prayer, and then don't feel guilty. There's no stipulation on going to a building that did not exist. These physical public churches did not exist for so long. They became big when churches tried to start taking control of the population. They were not a good thing. The fact that we all gathered together in one big building did not start happening for a positive reason. It started happening due to church control. And then it just never went away. And I'm not saying that's what they are now, but in a way, that's what a lot of them are now. The smaller ones, not so much in most cases, I'd say. But the larger one, that's exactly what they're doing. Just let it happen, Joe. The church thinks God is going to smite us anyways. That's true. That's true. Can't argue with that. I agree. Ghost and those people are scary. Yeah. I mean, illogical sheep, humans, are terrifying. They should terrify you. Like real bad. Because they are going to be why society collapses. Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Everyone is a temple. Yes. My body is a temple. Yesterday, I told Joe they had to add pages to the Bible because of you in a flirtatious way, and all he wanted to do was make apart my theology. I didn't get it. I was like waiting for the punchline. But then, yeah, I started thinking about like, what would the implications be if there were extra pages in the Bible that had to do with me? I started over academically analyzing the flirtation. I'm sorry. This is why women hate me. Let's give all our money to the poor, then walk around and tell people about Jesus. If we die sleeping outside in the cold, then we die. Gonna die anyways. It's like 45 minutes one way to get there. So Sundays, I'm just too tired of being out. Then I'd say move on from that church. If it's a reason that you don't go to the church that is like, it's not that it's an invalid reason, but it's a reason that's never going to go away. You're always going to be 45 minutes from the church. So either go or don't is what I would say. Because I think, yeah, just popping in when like you feel like it is kind of a bad look. It's kind of a bad look. I would either find a closer church or find a different way to do church. The church we were going to, it was 30 minutes away. And it's a part of why I stopped going. Because yeah, I need the extra time. I want the extra time. I don't need it. I want the extra time. I also feel no tie to a physical building. And I'd much prefer to do this with you guys. And do what we do Sunday night. And do Bible study. I get much more value out of that than I do by sitting and listening to somebody who usually I don't agree with. I'm kind of scared to do religion on my own. I'm afraid I don't know enough or won't do it right. Spaces like these are me dipping my toes into it. Well, I don't think you should do that at all. I think that's a terrible idea. Not that you were insinuating that, but I don't think anybody should do religion alone. Because that's a really easy way for you to start making stuff up because it feels good or it sounds good or you think it's true. You gotta think about this. The literal smartest, most academically fueled theologians on the planet don't agree with each other. because there is no right answer. There is no right way of doing religion. There is no right way of doing Christianity. I think the best thing you can do as an individual is say, what do I believe? What beliefs within my own system contradict what I believe? Because there is no Christian on the planet who, should they actually go about that, who don't have to deal with it. There is no honest Christian. It's impossible for a Christian to be honest about all the main things they believe, and then to say nothing in the Bible, nothing in Christianity contradicts what I believe. It doesn't exist. Even me with very, very loose theological beliefs, there are still things within the Bible that contradict my beliefs. And then I have to wrestle with that. The best thing you can do, decide what you believe, and then literally become the person who's debating you. Go find every possible thing that you can that disproves what you believe. Try to tear your own belief system apart. And then guess what? Nobody else can. You already did. And if somebody ever points it out, you can then look like the smartest Christian on the planet when you're like, yeah, actually, I've thought about that. I understand that, this verse contradicts with my belief of free will and free agency. And, this is kind of how I parsed that issue. But I really don't know. I've come to where I've gotten. It's the best I've been able to do. I'll always be trying to learn. I'll always be trying to figure things out. I will always admit that I have no idea. These are what I think. This is what I think. I guess on my own means without the organized church, I've had those training wheels on for so long it's scary to do it another way. Well, that I'm down for. Yeah, you don't need a church for this. And in a lot of cases, I think church does more harm than good. For people who are not open-minded, for people who are cognitive thinkers, like you people are, church can do more damage than good. That doesn't mean it will. It means it can. So use your logical brain, use your cognitive thinking that I know you all have when you go to church and say, is this providing value to me in broadening myself, or is this causing me to be more boxed in? And based on that answer, either stay or go. But anything that's trying to convince you to see things this way and only this way, I would run the hell away from that. As long as you have the right intentions, Nat, you'll end up in the right place. That's why you found us. Yeah, exactly. We will always broaden you if the church ends up narrowing you. That's for sure. I have questioned everything of what I believe and still have questions. That means you're honest, and that will never change. Read what Ruth said. I have questioned everything of what I believe and still have questions. If that sentence ever changes for Ruth, it means she's been brainwashed. You should never say anything other than exactly what she just said. I've questioned everything I believe and I still have questions. If it ever becomes, I've questioned everything I believe and I've figured it out, you're an idiot. Congratulations. You are now brainwashed. You can now please get the hell out of our group. Go somewhere else. We are not for the brainwashed. What Ruth said is exactly what your truth should always be until you die. I'm constantly questioning everything I believe, and I constantly have more questions. That's it. And if you ever stop having questions, red flag, and realize you have gone down a dark alley of self-inflated righteousness because you think you have figured it out. And I promise you never will. I never will. Always have questions. That's a great philosophy for life. More importantly, 100%. 100%. Is this bringing me closer to the creator of the universe, or is this molding me into a dogmatic tithe giver who judges anyone who believes differently as inferiors? That's a great way of going about it. It's a great way of looking at it. Absolutely. All right, guys, I need to start tying this in. I didn't realize what time it was. So I guess just quick recap. Understand. We all should be critical thinkers. Everybody here is. Because I promise you, the sheep, whether they're Christian or not, cannot bear to listen to me talk. It's been proven over like 8 years. People who don't cognitively think, they can't stand listening to me. I've watched it in their eyes. They break down because they hate me so much. So everybody here is a critical thinker. I'm absolutely convinced. Main things from tonight. Understand theology is different from denomination. Theology is the philosophy of the religious world. It should be, at least, a super broad way of trying to understand religious concepts, religious beliefs, doctrines. It's a philosophical approach to religion. It's understanding what is God. Because from that question, everything stems from it. Literally everything. Down to why mosquitoes bite. Everything stems from what is God. Actually think about that for a second. Literally everything. You pushing your foot out right now and kicking the back of a desk has to do with the question, what is God? Everything does. So what is theology? It's fucking everything. Excuse my language. It's everything. Theology encompasses all of your reality. So theology should be super important to you. If it's not, make it. For me, it's real weird. People who say they're Christian or they're spiritual or whatever and aren't like spending time on theology in some fashion. And it can be fun theology, like listen to a podcast or just do this with us. Like, this is theology. You don't need to do anything else. I'll give you your dose of theology. But I just mean, you don't need to be obsessed. I'm just saying, the Christians who never look at theology, to me, they're not Christians. They're people who slapped a label on their forehead and have no freaking idea what they believe. They're puppets. That's not us. So theology is super important. Understanding, though, that theology is not the same as denominations. But denominations are the same as theology. It just doesn't go both ways. Denominations are made up of theologies. Theologies are not made up of denominations. Denominations are garbage. They're absolute trash. It's all made up ways of grouping people together in buildings, of grouping us versus them, team versus team, Christian versus Christian. That's what denominations are. Christians got privy to this, which is why they started non-denominational, because we're open to everybody, except you're not. Because you're still just teaching Reformed theology. You're just saying you're non-denominational. You're still teaching Baptist theology. You just say you're non-denominational. So again, denominations, bad. Denominations are created based off of a theological view. Theology, good. Non-denominational fucking doesn't exist. It's poof. It's nothing. Non-denominational is a manipulative con to get you to believe that they teach general theology, which doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It can't exist. So non-denominational is a con to teach a specific theology that would tie to an already existing denomination. Meaning, Reformed theological churches exist already. What is the denomination? It's Reformed. It's Calvinist. That's their denomination. But how do we get more tithes? How do we get more people? Well, we take the exact same people from the Reformed Church with the same lessons, the same viewpoints, the same education, and the same sermons to be preached, and we move them to a different building, and we slap non-denominational on it. We're going to get more people. We're going to change nothing about what we believe. nothing about what we teach. We're just going to do it under a different sign, under a different name. Doesn't exist. Con, lie, manipulation, whatever you want to call it, doesn't exist. If you're going to learn or care about anything, learn about theology. Or just hang out with us, and you will learn about theology. Ignore denominations like the plague. And every time you hear somebody say non-denominational, don't be a jerk, but in your head, think about how stupid that is, how illogical it is, and how everybody inside of that building has been captured and manipulated by a lie. And you be nice. Like I said, don't be an asshole. Don't say anything to the person unless you know them, then maybe talk to them about it. But you in your head process why non-denominational churches don't actually exist. Think about it and be like, yeah, I remember this is bullshit. Or go to that church's website. And if you can find, how about this? If you can find a non-denominational church and you're able to prove to me what denomination they actually are, I'll do something cool for you. So if you find a non-denominational church that within their statement of faith or any of their articles or anything like that, you can find where they're absolutely Calvinists, I'll do something cool for you. Because it's really not that hard. But it would take work. So you'd have to go do it. I did it. It's really not that hard. If Mary had Jesus and Jesus had the Lamb of God, does that mean Mary had a little lamb? Jesus Christ. Oh, God is so, you're sweet. You're very sweet. How can people hate you? You're so based. I mean, some of the times, I guess. I'm too based, I think is why people hate me. You said ask questions. Nobody can argue with that logic. His fleece was somewhat olive colored, though. That's true. Wait, you're telling me Jesus wasn't white and blue-eyed? Blasphemy. Jesus was actually German. My life is a lie. Mormons crying in the distance. As an olive skin girly. I love the representation. Yeah. Jesus was olive skinned at the lightest. He was probably darker than that, if we're being completely honest. And also, he was not born in December, just in case anybody was wondering. All right, 20 seconds. Any last comments here? Otherwise, I'm going to shut down. God, we almost went 2 hours. As a translucent skinned guy, I'm jealous. Yeah, me too, man. Me too. TikTok. Get off TikTok. I mean, don't now because we're done. But go to YouTube next time because all the friends are on YouTube. Anybody who's anybody's on YouTube. You guys should know that. Get off the Chinese Spy app. I love you though. Just to be clear. As a translucent, I already read that. All right, y'all. I'm gonna power down. I love you guys. You're all beautiful. Thank you for being what the kids would say and what Mystic said. Based. In my eyes, thank you for not being stupid, is how I view it, I guess. Thank you all for being intelligent and for using your brains and for refusing to just accept things that anybody says, including myself. Thank you all for questioning everything. Not too much, but enough. That's pretty much it. I love you all for that. Genuinely. I have a lot of respect for everybody here. I will see you all in Discord. Have a lovely evening. And hopefully we see you Sunday night for... So we're starting another book, so show up. We're starting James. And then we're going to go through chronological order, the whole New Testament. Mystic and the kids. One of my older sons. No, you're young. You're young. You're young and hip, like the kids. Okay, I love you guys. I'll see you at Bible study. Sunday, 6 p.m. Central Time, same time as this. But on Sunday, the earth is flat. And I'm out of here before we get into flat earth crap again. I love you guys. Bye.